Chapter 1. The eviction notice might as well have been written in blood. Clara Winters stared at the crisp white paper in her trembling hands, the words blurring as exhaustion made her eyes water. 30 days. $3,000. The numbers might as well have been 30 million for all the hope she had of scraping them together. Mommy? Sophie's small voice cut through the fog of panic. Why are you crying? Clara quickly wiped her eyes and forced a smile as she turned to face her 6-year-old daughter. Sophie stood in the doorway of their tiny kitchen, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit, those enormous brown eyes, so much like her father's, filled with concern that no child should have to feel. I'm not crying, baby. Just tired. The lie came easily now, after months of practice. Did you finish your homework? Sophie nodded solemnly. Mrs. Patterson says I'm the best reader in first grade. That's because you are brilliant. Clara folded the notice and shoved it into the junk drawer where it could join the overdue utility bills and final payment demands. She'd deal with reality later. Right now, she had exactly 43 minutes before she had to leave for her evening shift at the diner. The knock on the door made them both jump. I'll get it. Sophie raced toward the front door of their cramped apartment, but Clara caught her arm gently. Remember the rule? Never open the door without you. Sophie sighed dramatically. But it's probably just Lila. It was Lila, juggling a bag of Chinese takeout and wearing that determined expression that usually meant trouble. Clara's best friend since college pushed her way inside, took one look at Clara's face, and set the food on the coffee table. Okay, what happened now? Nothing happened. Clara Winters, you look like someone just told you Santa Claus was a serial killer. Spill. Sophie giggled at that, and the sound loosened something tight in Clara's chest. When was the last time she'd heard her daughter laugh? Really laugh, not the careful, polite sound she made when she thought Clara was watching. Can we eat first? Clara gestured toward the takeout. I have to work in an hour. Actually, no. Lila crossed her arms. You're not working tonight. Lila, I can't afford to. I already called Damian. Told him you had food poisoning. Lila held up a hand before Clara could protest. One of the regulars is covering your shift, and yes, she'll give you the tips. Clara sank onto their second-hand couch, suddenly too tired to argue. Why would you do that? Because you're going on a date. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Absolutely not. Absolutely yes. Lila sat down beside her, her voice gentling. Clara, when was the last time you did something just for you? When was the last time you talked to an adult who wasn't taking your order or asking for your rent? Sophie had settled on the floor with her takeout container, but Clara could see her listening intently. Kids always knew more than adults gave them credit for. I don't have time for dates. I have responsibilities. You have a life, Lila said firmly. Or you're supposed to. Look, I know someone. No. He's nice. Normal. Works in construction, has his own business. No weird hobbies, no criminal record I could find. You ran a background check. I'm thorough. Lila grinned. His name is Jake Morrison. He's funny, he's stable, and he specifically asked to meet a woman who values family. Despite herself, Clara felt a flicker of curiosity. It had been 2 years since Sophie's father walked out, claiming he wasn't ready for the responsibility. She'd sworn off dating, throwing herself into work and raising Sophie. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, she ached with loneliness. I don't have anything to wear, she said weakly. I brought options. Lila gestured toward a garment bag Clara hadn't noticed. And Sophie's already agreed to have a sleepover at my place. You planned this. Clara looked between her daughter and her best friend. You two conspired against me. Sophie nodded solemnly. Lila says you need to remember how to have fun. Traitor. But Clara was smiling now, the first real smile she'd managed in weeks. An hour later, Clara stared at herself in Lila's bathroom mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back. The black dress was simple but flattering, skimming her curves without being too revealing. Lila had tamed her unruly hair into soft waves, and a touch of makeup had erased the shadows under her eyes. "You look beautiful," Lila said from the doorway. "I look like I'm pretending to be someone else. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe for one night, you can pretend to be a woman who doesn't carry the weight of the world on her shoulders." Clara touched the small silver locket at her throat, Sophie's picture inside, always close to her heart. What if something happens? What if Sophie needs me? Then you'll come home. But Clara, what if nothing happens? What if you just have a nice dinner with a nice man and remember that you're more than just Sophie's mom? The guilt twisted in Clara's stomach like a living thing. Sophie was everything to her, the reason she got up every morning, the reason she worked 3 jobs, the reason she kept fighting when everything felt hopeless. How could she justify spending money on dinner when they might be homeless in 30 days? "I can't afford this," she whispered. "He's paying. And before you get all feminist on me," he insisted. Apparently his mother raised him right. Clara closed her eyes, letting herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might feel like to sit across from a man who looked at her like she was worth knowing. Someone who didn't see her as just another waitress or cleaning lady or retail clerk. Someone who might actually listen when she talked. "One dinner," she said finally. "One dinner," Lila agreed. 20 minutes later, Clara stood outside Romano's, the nicest restaurant she'd ever been to, smoothing her dress with nervous hands. Through the window, she could see couples at candlelit tables, laughing and talking like they didn't have a care in the world. For a moment, the divide between their world and hers felt insurmountable. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lila: "Sophie's asleep. She made me promise to tell you to have fun. Now stop overthinking and go inside." Clara took a deep breath, tasting possibility on the evening air. Maybe Lila was right. Maybe she deserved this one night, this one chance to remember who she was before life ground her down to nothing but survival and responsibility. Maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to hope. She pushed open the restaurant door and stepped into the warm, golden light, not knowing that across town, something ancient and wild had caught her scent on the wind and was even now turning its attention toward the woman who would change everything. The hostess smiled at her. "Are you meeting someone?" "Yes," Clara said, and for the first time in years, she meant it in more ways than one. Chapter 2. He was nothing like what Lila had described. Clara spotted him immediately, not because he was the only man sitting alone, but because every person in the restaurant seemed to unconsciously lean away from his table. He commanded space without saying a word, his presence filling the room like a low-frequency hum that made her skin prickle with awareness. Dark hair, darker eyes, and a face that belonged on movie screens rather than across from overworked single mothers in borrowed dresses. When he looked up and saw her, something flickered in those midnight eyes: surprise, recognition, hunger, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. He stood as she approached, and Clara realized Lila had failed to mention he was built like he could bench press a car. The hostess had said his name was Damian, but this man looked like he should be called something ancient and powerful. Something that required a title. "Clara?" His voice was warm honey over gravel, with just enough roughness to make her pulse skip. "You're even more beautiful than Lila described." Heat flooded her cheeks. "You must be Damian." "Just Damian." He pulled out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy that should have felt outdated but instead made her feel treasured. "I hope you don't mind, I took the liberty of ordering wine. But if you prefer something else." "Wine is perfect." She settled into her seat, hyper-aware of how close he was as he helped with her chair. He smelled like pine forests and something wilder, something that made her want to breathe deeper. As he returned to his seat, Clara caught the server watching them with barely concealed interest. The young woman's eyes lingered on Damian with a mixture of awe and nervousness that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "So," Clara said, desperate to break the tension crackling between them, "Lila mentioned you work in security?" Something shuddered in his expression. "Security consulting." Corporate protection, risk assessment. Nothing too exciting. The careful neutrality in his tone told Clara there was more to it, but she'd learned not to push when people deflected. Everyone had secrets. That sounds important. She accepted the wine he poured, grateful for something to do with her hands. Must be demanding work. It has its challenges. Damian studied her with an intensity that made her feel like a puzzle he was trying to solve. Lila tells me you're a single mother. Clara stiffened, waiting for the usual reaction: pity, discomfort, or worse, the assumption that she was looking for someone to rescue her. I am. My daughter Sophie is 6. She lifted her chin slightly. If that's a problem. It's not a problem. His interruption was gentle but firm. I think children are gifts. The fact that you're raising one on your own tells me you're stronger than most people I know. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Clara had expected polite tolerance at best, not genuine respect. Most men run when they hear I have a daughter. Then they're idiots. Damian leaned forward, his attention completely focused on her. Tell me about her. For the next hour, Clara found herself talking about Sophie in ways she hadn't with anyone except Lila. Damian listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about Sophie's school, her favorite books, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. He didn't check his phone once, didn't let his attention wander, didn't make Clara feel like she was monopolizing the conversation with mom talk. She sounds remarkable, he said when the server brought their entrees. Independent, like her mother. Sometimes too independent. She tries to take care of me instead of the other way around. Clara cut into her salmon, amazed at how natural this felt. Last week she tried to pack my lunch for work because she was worried I wasn't eating enough. Damian went very still. She takes care of you? She tries to. It's just been the two of us for a while now, and she's incredibly intuitive. Sometimes I think she knows how hard things are, even though I try to hide it. Something dangerous flashed in Damian's eyes. Her father? Left when she was 4. Said he wasn't ready for responsibility. Clara shrugged, aiming for casual and missing by miles. His loss. Completely his loss. The quiet fury in Damian's voice surprised her. Any man who walks away from his child is no man at all. The conviction in his words made Clara's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. She'd grown so used to explaining, justifying, making excuses for Lucas's abandonment that hearing someone simply validate her anger felt revolutionary. You sound like you speak from experience. Damian's expression darkened. My father wasn't exactly father of the year material. I learned early what kind of man I didn't want to be. There was pain there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Clara found herself wanting to reach across the table, to offer comfort the way he'd somehow comforted her. I'm sorry. Don't be. It made me who I am. Damian seemed to shake off whatever shadows had crossed his mind. What about your family? Are they supportive? Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. My parents weren't thrilled when I got pregnant young and unmarried. We don't talk much. They're lost too, then. The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, made Clara's throat tight. When was the last time someone had taken her side so completely, so instinctively? You barely know me, she said softly. I know enough. Damian's gaze held hers. I know you work 3 jobs to support your daughter. I know you're here instead of working because your best friend staged an intervention. I know you're probably calculating how much this meal costs and feeling guilty for enjoying yourself. Clara's fork froze halfway to her mouth. How could you possibly? Because I've been watching you. The way you looked at the prices on the menu. The way you keep checking your phone for messages from Lila. The way you're sitting like you're ready to bolt at any second. His voice gentled. You don't have to run, Clara. Not tonight. Something in his tone made her believe him, made her want to stay when every instinct screamed at her to protect herself. She'd learned the hard way that when things seemed too good to be true, they usually were. This is all very surreal, she admitted. I don't date. I don't have time for dating. But you're here. Lila can be very persuasive. Remind me to thank her. Damian smiled, and the expression transformed his face from intimidating to devastating. What do you do when you're not working? Sleep, mostly. Clara surprised herself by laughing. I know that sounds pathetic, but between the diner, the cleaning service, and retail, there isn't much time for hobbies. Damian went very still again. 3 jobs. The way he said it made Clara defensive. Lots of people work multiple jobs. Not by choice, usually. His voice was carefully controlled. That's a lot of pressure for one person. I manage. Clara straightened her shoulders. Sophie and I do fine. I'm sure you do. But you shouldn't have to just survive, Clara. You should be able to live. The words hit too close to home, too close to the desperate exhaustion she carried like a weight in her chest. Clara felt tears threaten and blinked them back furiously. I should go. She started to reach for her purse, but Damian caught her hand. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. His skin was warm, almost hot, and she could have sworn she felt his pulse racing as fast as hers. Did I say something wrong? His thumb brushed across her knuckles, sending shivers through her entire body. No, you said something right. That's the problem. Clara stared down at their joined hands. I can't afford to want things I can't have. What if you could have them? The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities that terrified her. Clara looked up to find Damian watching her with an expression she couldn't read, intense, almost predatory, but gentle at the same time. I should go, she repeated, but she didn't pull her hand away. Stay. The word was barely above a whisper. Please. For a moment, Clara let herself imagine what it would be like to be the kind of woman who could stay. Who could let a man like Damian into her carefully controlled life? Who could risk her heart on someone who looked at her like she was precious? Then reality crashed back in. The eviction notice. The mounting bills. Sophie, sleeping safely at Lila's but depending on Clara to keep their tiny world from falling apart. I can't, she said, finally pulling her hand free. This was lovely, really, but I can't do this. Damian studied her for a long moment, and Clara had the strangest feeling he could see right through her defenses to the longing she was trying so hard to hide. Let me drive you home. I can take a cab. Clara. He said her name like it was something precious. Let me drive you home. 20 minutes later, Clara found herself in the passenger seat of Damian's truck, not the luxury car she'd expected, but a practical pickup that smelled like leather and that same wild scent she'd noticed at dinner. He drove with confident ease through the city streets, and Clara found herself relaxing despite everything. Thank you, she said as he pulled up in front of her building. For dinner, for everything. Thank you for coming. Damian turned to face her, and in the dim light from the street lamp, his eyes seemed to glow. Clara? Yes? This doesn't have to be goodbye. The hope in his voice made her chest ache. Damian. Think about it. That's all I ask. Clara nodded and reached for the door handle, but Damian was already out of the truck, coming around to help her. Always the gentleman, even when she was running away. I'll wait until you're inside, he said. Clara looked up at him, this mysterious man who treated her like something valuable for one perfect evening. Who'd listened when she talked about Sophie, who'd seen through her defenses like they were made of glass. I don't even know your last name, she said suddenly. Something flickered across his features, guilt, maybe, or regret. Does it matter? I guess not. But even as she said it, Clara knew it did matter. Everything about this man mattered, and that was exactly why she had to walk away. Good night, Clara. Good night. She made it to her door before turning back, but the truck was already gone, vanished into the night like it had never been there at all. Like Damian had never been there at all. But her lips still tingled from the wine he'd shared, and her hand still burned where he'd touched it, and Clara knew that no matter how hard she tried, She'd never forget the man who'd made her feel like she was worth something more than survival. 3 blocks away, Damian sat in his truck with his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard the metal groaned. His wolf was going insane, demanding he go back, claim what was his, protect the woman who'd just walked away. Mate. The word pounded through his blood like a drumbeat. Mate, mate, mate. He'd known the moment he'd caught her scent in the restaurant. Hell, he'd probably known before that, when something had pulled him to answer Lila's call about her friend who needed a good night. His wolf had been restless for weeks, driving him to patrol the city like he was searching for something. Someone. Clara. His mate was a single mother working 3 jobs to keep her head above water. His mate was strong and fierce and protective, exactly what his wolf craved. His mate was also completely human, with no idea what she'd just walked away from. And Damian had no idea how to tell her that he was the alpha king of the largest werewolf pack on the East Coast, that he commanded loyalty from hundreds of wolves, that his world was filled with violence and politics and secrets that could get her killed. How did you tell a woman like Clara, a woman who valued honesty and stability above all else, that you were a monster who'd been lying to her from the moment you met? Damian closed his eyes and tried to think past the wolf's demands. Clara had enough problems without adding him to the list. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to walk away. Let her find a nice, normal human man who could give her the quiet life she deserved. But even as he thought it, Damian knew he couldn't do it. His wolf wouldn't let him, and more than that, his heart wouldn't let him. Clara Winters was his mate, and somehow, he was going to find a way to make her his without destroying everything she held dear. The question was how. Chapter 3. Clara was halfway up the stairs to her apartment when she turned around. The smart thing would be to go inside, check on her carefully balanced budget, and pretend the evening with Damian had never happened. The smart thing would be to focus on reality, the eviction notice, the mounting bills, the fact that she couldn't afford to complicate her life with a man who made her feel things she'd forgotten she could feel. But when had Clara ever been accused of being smart when it came to men? She found Damian leaning against his truck, staring up at her building like he was memorizing it. He straightened when he saw her approaching, and even in the dim streetlight, she could see the surprise on his face. "Forget something?" he asked. "Coffee," Clara said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I was going to ask if you wanted coffee. I make terrible coffee, but it's better than going home to an empty apartment." The words tumbled out faster than she intended. "If you want to, I mean. If you don't have somewhere else to be." Damian stepped closer, close enough that she could see the way his eyes seemed to catch the light. "I don't have anywhere else to be." "Good." Clara swallowed hard. "Great. Coffee it is." Her hands shook as she unlocked the building's front door, hyper-aware of Damian behind her as they climbed the narrow stairs. She'd never brought a man home before, not since Sophie was born, not since she'd learned the hard way that her daughter had to come first, always. But Sophie was safe at Lila's, and Clara was tired of being careful, tired of being responsible, tired of being alone. "This is it," she said, opening the door to her tiny apartment. "It's not much, but it's home." Damian stepped inside, and Clara tried to see the space through his eyes. The second-hand furniture, the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, Sophie's drawings covering every inch of the refrigerator. It was cramped and worn and probably worth less than what he'd spent on dinner. "Sophie's artwork?" he asked, moving toward the refrigerator with genuine interest. "She's very prolific." Clara busied herself with the coffee maker, grateful for something to do with her hands. "That one's her family portrait. The tall figure is me, the small one is her, and the furry blob is the dog she wants but we can't afford." Damian studied the drawing with the same intensity he'd focused on her all evening. "She drew you wearing a crown." Clara looked up, surprised. She'd never noticed that detail before. "She thinks I'm a queen, I guess. Wait until she's a teenager and realizes I have no idea what I'm doing. You're raising her alone, working 3 jobs, keeping her safe and happy and fed. That sounds like queen behavior to me." The quiet conviction in his voice made Clara's chest tight. She turned back to the coffee, afraid he might see how much his words affected her. "You're good at that," she said. "Good at what?" "Making people feel like they matter." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Clara could feel Damian watching her, could sense something shifting in the air around them. "You do matter, Clara. More than you know." She turned to find him standing much closer than she'd expected, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to smell that wild, woodsy scent that seemed to cling to his skin. "The coffee can wait." Damian reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and rough and gentle. "This is nice. Being here with you. Even though my apartment could fit in your truck. Especially because of that." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "You've built something real here. Something that matters." Clara's breath caught. "You don't know anything about my life." "Then tell me." They ended up on her couch with mugs of coffee that grew cold as Clara found herself talking about things she'd never told anyone. About growing up feeling like she never quite fit anywhere. About meeting Sophie's father in college and thinking she'd found her forever, only to watch him slowly pull away as the reality of parenthood set in. About the crushing weight of trying to be everything to everyone and never feeling like it was enough. "The worst part," Clara said, curled into the corner of the couch with her legs tucked under her, "is that I used to have dreams. I was going to be a teacher. I had this whole plan, finish my degree, get a job at a good school, maybe write children's books on the side. Then I got pregnant, and Lucas said we could make it work, but he left. He left." Clara stared into her coffee mug. "And suddenly I'm a single mother with no degree, no savings, and a baby who depends on me for everything. The dreams felt pretty stupid after that." "Dreams aren't stupid." Damian leaned forward, his voice intense. "What's stupid is giving up on them. Easy to say when you're not facing eviction." The words slipped out before Clara could stop them. She cursed silently, not wanting to sound like she was fishing for sympathy or money. Damian went very still. "Eviction? It's fine," Clara said quickly. "I'll figure it out. I always do." "How much?" "Damian. How much do you owe?" The quiet authority in his voice made Clara look up. For a moment, something flickered in his expression, something almost dangerous, before his features smoothed back into concern. $3,000, she admitted. "I have 30 days. Damian was quiet for so long that Clara began to regret telling him. Men didn't want to hear about a woman's financial problems on what was barely even a first date. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize." Damian set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. "You shouldn't have to carry all of this alone." "I'm not alone. I have Sophie, and Lila." "That's not what I meant." The way he was looking at her made Clara's pulse race. Like she was something precious he wanted to protect. Like she was worth protecting. "Damian. Let me help." "No." Clara shook her head firmly. "I don't take charity." "It wouldn't be charity." Damian reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "It would be an investment." "In what?" "In us." The word hung between them, loaded with possibility and promise and a dozen kinds of hope Clara couldn't afford to feel. "There is no us," she said softly. "We just met." "Did we?" Damian's thumb traced patterns on her palm that made her shiver. "Because I feel like I've been looking for you my whole life." The confession was so raw, so honest, that Clara felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. When was the last time someone had looked at her like Damian was looking at her now? Like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking forever? "You're dangerous," she whispered. "Only to people who threaten what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed her. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through her body like liquid fire. "I'm not yours. Aren't you?" Damian leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. Clara could feel her resolve melting, could feel herself falling towards something that might destroy her. "This is crazy," she breathed. "Completely crazy." Damian's lips were inches from hers. "Tell me to stop." Clara looked into his eyes and saw heat and hunger and something deeper, something that made her feel like the most important person in the world. "I can't," she admitted. When Damian kissed her, Clara's world tilted off its axis. His lips were warm and demanding, tasting like coffee and promises she was afraid to believe. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as he deepened the kiss with a hunger that matched her own. "Clara." Her name was a prayer on his lips as he trailed kisses down her throat. "God, you're perfect." "I'm not." "You are." Damian lifted his head to look at her, his eyes dark with desire. "You're everything." Clara had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted like this, to be cherished and desired and seen as something more than just a mother, just a worker, just someone trying to survive. Damian touched her like she was made of something precious, kissed her like she was the air he needed to breathe. When he carried her to her bedroom, Clara didn't protest. When he laid her down on her bed and worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, she let herself drown in sensation. When he moved over her, in her, around her, she forgot about everything except the way he made her feel alive again. They made love with desperate intensity, as if they were trying to memorize each other, as if they knew this moment was fragile and might shatter at dawn. Damian whispered her name like a benediction, and Clara gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, they lay tangled together in her narrow bed, Clara's head on Damian's chest as his fingers combed through her hair. "I should go," he said softly, but he made no move to leave. "Should you?" Clara traced patterns on his chest, marveling at the solid strength of him. "You need sleep. You have to work tomorrow." "Actually, I don't." Clara lifted her head to look at him. "It's Saturday. Sophie doesn't come home until Sunday afternoon." Something flashed in Damian's eyes, relief, hunger, possessiveness. "Then I'm not going anywhere." They talked until dawn, sharing stories and secrets and dreams they'd never voiced aloud. Clara learned that Damian had grown up hard, that he'd built his business from nothing, that he carried responsibilities that sometimes felt crushing. Damian learned that Clara sang to Sophie when she had nightmares, that she secretly loved terrible reality TV, that she still believed in happy endings even though life had taught her better. When exhaustion finally claimed them, Clara fell asleep in Damian's arms, feeling safer than she had in years. She woke alone. Clara's hand found only cold sheets where Damian had been, and for a moment she thought she'd dreamed the entire night. Then she saw the note on her nightstand, written in bold, masculine handwriting. "Had to leave for work emergency. Will call soon. M." Clara stared at the note until the words blurred together. The rational part of her brain understood that emergencies happened, that Damian had his own life and responsibilities. But the part of her that had been abandoned before, the part that had learned not to trust too quickly or love too deeply, whispered that she should have known better. She should have known better than to let a stranger into her home, into her bed, into the carefully guarded spaces of her heart. She should have known better than to think a man like Damian could really want someone like her for more than one night. Clara crushed the note in her fist and closed her eyes against the sting of tears. She'd been so careful, so protected, for so long. One night with Damian had undone years of hard-earned wisdom, and now she was left with the familiar ache of disappointment and the bitter knowledge that she'd been a fool. Again. The worst part wasn't even the abandonment, it was how much she'd revealed, how completely she'd opened herself to someone who could just walk away. She'd told him about the eviction, about her dreams, about Sophie. She'd given him everything, and he'd left her with a note. Clara pulled the covers over her head and let herself cry for the dreams she'd been stupid enough to believe in for one perfect, devastating night. Chapter 4. Damian had been Alpha King for 7 years, and he'd never once questioned a command decision. Until he'd left Clara sleeping in her narrow bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow like silk, her face peaceful in the dawn light. Every instinct he possessed had screamed at him to stay, to claim what was his, to never let her out of his sight again. Instead, he'd written a note like a coward and walked away. The elevator to his penthouse climbed 43 floors, but it felt like falling into hell. Damian stared at his reflection in the polished steel doors. The same face that had looked down at Clara with wonder just hours before now looked haggard, haunted. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his skin, furious at the distance between them and their mate. Mate. The word still sent shockwaves through his system. In all his years as alpha, through all the eligible female wolves who'd been paraded before him, through all the political marriages his council had suggested, he'd never felt even a flicker of the recognition that had slammed into him the moment he'd caught Clara's scent. The elevator doors opened to reveal Victor Thorne waiting in the marble foyer, his expression grim. Damian's beta and oldest friend looked like he hadn't slept, which meant pack business. Which meant Damian's personal crisis would have to wait. How bad? Damian asked, shedding his jacket as he walked toward his office. 3 territorial disputes in the last 6 hours. The Seattle pack is challenging our shipping routes again. And there's been another incident with the hunters. Victor fell into step beside him, his tone carefully neutral. But first, we need to talk about where you've been. Damian paused in the doorway of his office, a room that commanded a view of the entire city, including the neighborhood where Clara was probably just waking up. I told you I had personal business. Personal business that had you disappearing for 12 hours without backup or communication. Victor closed the door behind them. Damian, you're the Alpha King. You can't just vanish. I can do whatever the hell I want. The words came out sharper than Damian intended, edged with the frustration of a wolf separated from his mate. Victor raised an eyebrow. Okay, what happened? And don't tell me nothing, because you smell like... He stopped, his nostrils flaring slightly. Jesus Christ, Damian. You smell like a woman. Drop it, Victor. I can't drop it. You disappeared last night, you come back smelling like sex and something else, something. Victor's eyes widened as understanding dawned. No. No, you didn't. Damian turned away, pouring himself 3 fingers of whiskey despite the early hour. Didn't what? Find her. Your mate. Victor sank into one of the leather chairs facing Damian's desk. A human. You found your mate, and she's human. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Finally, Damian nodded. Fuck. Victor ran his hands through his hair. Okay. Okay, we can handle this. Who is she? What's her background? Please tell me she's at least wealthy, connected, someone who can handle our world. She's a single mother who works 3 jobs and is about to be evicted. Victor stared at him. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? Damian drained his whiskey in one swallow. Her name is Clara Winters. She has a 6-year-old daughter named Sophie. She's the strongest, most courageous woman I've ever met, and she has no idea what I am. Damian. Victor leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. You know this is impossible. Nothing is impossible. A human mate? A human mother? Victor shook his head. The council will never accept her. The pack traditions, the security risks, the exposure. I don't give a damn what the council thinks. Damian's voice carried the edge of command that made weaker wolves submit. She's mine. And what happens when she finds out what you are? What we are? Victor stood, pacing to the windows. You think a woman who's struggling to keep her head above water wants to be dragged into our world? You think she wants her daughter exposed to the violence, the politics, the constant danger? Every word hit like a physical blow because Victor was right. Clara's life was complicated enough without adding werewolf politics and supernatural threats. But Damian's wolf didn't care about logic or safety or rational thought. It only cared that their mate was miles away, probably hurting because he'd left without explanation. She needs help, Damian said quietly. She's about to lose her apartment. So help her. Anonymously. Set up a trust, make some calls, solve her problems from a distance. Victor turned back to him. But don't drag her into this world, Damian. For her sake and Sophie's. Damian knew Victor was right. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to help Clara from the shadows and stay away. But the thought of never seeing her again, never touching her, never hearing her laugh or watching her eyes light up when she talked about Sophie, it felt like death. The territorial disputes, Damian said, forcing himself to focus on pack business. Brief me. For the next 3 hours, Damian threw himself into the duties that had defined his life for 7 years. Territory maps, shipping manifests, incident reports, the endless machinery of running the largest werewolf pack on the East Coast. But even as he made decisions and issued orders, part of his mind remained focused on a tiny apartment across the city where his mate was waking up alone. By noon, he couldn't take it anymore. I need you to set something up, Damian told Victor as his beta prepared to leave for a meeting with the Seattle PAC's representatives. Anonymously. Victor sighed. What kind of something? A benefactor program. Corporate charity, community outreach, whatever you want to call it. Someone in Clara's building is going to receive assistance with their rent. Make it look random, make it look legitimate. Damian. $3,000. Today. Damian's tone brooked no argument. And Victor? Make sure it's untraceable. After Victor left, Damian stood at his windows looking out over the city. Somewhere down there, Clara was probably getting ready for work, probably worried about Sophie, probably trying not to think about the man who'd shared her bed and then disappeared like smoke. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Lila. Clara's friend. If you hurt her, I will destroy you. Just so we're clear. Damian almost smiled. Clara's friend was fierce, protective. Good. Clara deserved people who would fight for her. He was considering how to respond when Victor burst back into the office, his face pale. We have a problem. What now? I had our people run a background check on Clara, just routine security protocol. Victor held out a tablet. Her ex-husband, Ethan Hale. He's been in Los Angeles for the past 2 years, but he flew into the city this morning. Damian felt his blood turn to ice. What does he want? According to the flight manifest, he's booked through the weekend. But Damian, there's more. Victor pulled up another screen. He's been in contact with a family law attorney. This isn't a social visit. The words hit Damian like a physical blow. Someone was threatening Sophie, threatening Clara's little girl. His wolf went berserk, demanding action, demanding protection, demanding blood. Where is he now? We're tracking him. But Damian, think about this. You can't just... Can't what? Damian's voice was deadly quiet. Can't protect my mate and her daughter from a man who abandoned them? You can't reveal yourself. Not for this. Not without exposing everything. Damian stared at the photo of Ethan Hale on the screen, a weak-faced man with calculating eyes who'd walked away from the most precious things in the world. The urge to find him, to make him understand exactly what happened to men who threatened what belonged to Damian Nightshade, was almost overwhelming. But Victor was right. The supernatural world stayed hidden for good reasons. Exposure meant war, meant chaos, meant innocent people getting hurt. And Clara was innocent. Sophie was innocent. They didn't deserve to be dragged into a war between species. Get me everything, Damian said finally. Phone records, financial records, who he's working with, what he wants. Everything. Already on it. Damian turned back to the windows, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Below, the city continued its relentless pace, unaware that somewhere in its maze of streets, a 6-year-old girl was about to face a crisis that could tear her world apart. And there was nothing her mother's mate could do to stop it without destroying them all. His phone rang, and Damian grabbed it without looking at the caller ID, hoping against hope that it might be Clara. Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood? This is Patricia Kim from Child Protective Services. The woman's voice was crisp, professional. I'm calling regarding Sophie Winters. Her father has filed for emergency custody, and we need to schedule a home visit with Ms. Chen as soon as possible. The phone creaked in Damian's grip. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number. You're listed as an emergency contact on Sophie's school forms. Miss Chen listed you as her boyfriend?" Damian closed his eyes. Clara must have been desperate to put his name down, must have been trying to make their life look more stable on paper. The thought of her struggling, alone, trying to build a foundation for Sophie that would keep them together, made his chest tight with rage and protectiveness. "When?" he managed. "Tomorrow morning at 10. Ms. Chen has been notified." "Mr. Blackwood, I should tell you that these situations can be quite difficult. If there are any irregularities in the home environment, any signs of instability or inappropriate relationships." She let the threat hang in the air. Damian understood perfectly. Clara's ex-husband wasn't just seeking custody, he was trying to paint her as an unfit mother. And Damian, the mysterious boyfriend who'd appeared out of nowhere, was probably being positioned as evidence of Clara's poor judgment. "Ms. Kim," Damian said carefully, "what exactly has Mr. Torres alleged?" "I can't discuss the specifics, but he's raised concerns about Ms. Chen's living situation, her financial stability, and her recent associations. The home visit will allow us to assess Sophie's best interests." After the woman hung up, Damian stood frozen in his office, caught between the wolf's demand for action and the painful knowledge that any help he offered might only make things worse for Clara. Victor returned an hour later with a file thick enough to choke on. "Ethan Hale," he said, dropping it on Damian's desk. 32 years old, marketing executive, currently living in Los Angeles with his girlfriend of 18 months. No criminal record, but here's the interesting part, he's drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, behind on his car payments, facing bankruptcy. So why come back for Sophie now? His girlfriend is pregnant. Due in 3 months. Victor sat down heavily. "My guess? He's planning to use Sophie to get to Clara. Child support, maybe even alimony if he can prove she's been living with someone. Or what? Or he's planning to use Sophie as leverage to get Clara to do something. Sign something, give him something." Victor met Damian's eyes. "The question is, what does Clara have that he wants?" Damian thought about Clara's tiny apartment, her second-hand furniture, her 3 jobs just to make ends meet. She had nothing of material value. But she had Sophie. And to a desperate man facing financial ruin, a daughter might look like a very valuable asset indeed. "I have to help her," Damian said. "Not directly. Not without risking everything." Victor leaned forward. "But indirectly?" "Damian, you have resources. Lawyers, investigators, influence. You can help Clara without her ever knowing it came from you. And if that's not enough?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. "Then you'll have to decide what matters more, protecting the pack's secrets, or protecting your mate." Damian looked out at the city again, knowing that somewhere in its sprawl, Clara was probably crying, probably terrified, probably feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. He'd found his mate, the one woman in the world meant for him. And he couldn't even tell her she wasn't alone. The Alpha King who commanded hundreds of wolves, who could buy and sell corporations with a phone call, who could level city blocks if he chose, was completely powerless to protect the 2 people who mattered most. But powerless or not, he was going to find a way. Because the alternative, losing Clara and Sophie to a man who'd already proven he didn't deserve them, was unthinkable. Even if it meant risking everything he'd spent his life building. Chapter 5. Clara knew something was wrong the moment she saw Mrs. Patterson's face. Sophie's first-grade teacher stood in the hallway outside the classroom, wringing her hands and wearing the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else in the world. When she spotted Clara hurrying down the corridor, relief and anxiety warred across her features. "Miss Chen, thank goodness you're here." Mrs. Patterson glanced nervously toward the classroom door. "There's been a situation." Clara's blood turned to ice. "Is Sophie hurt? Is she sick?" No, she's fine. She's in the classroom working on her reading." "But..." Mrs. Patterson lowered her voice. "Sophie's father is here." He's in the principal's office with a lawyer, and they're asking to take Sophie with them. The hallway tilted around Clara like the deck of a sinking ship. That's impossible. Ethan doesn't have custody rights. He gave them up when. They have papers, Clara. Principal Rodriguez appeared beside them, his usually warm demeanor replaced by professional caution. Court documents. We can't release Sophie to you until this is sorted out, but we also can't let her leave with them without your consent. Clara's legs went weak. 2 years. Ethan had been gone for 2 years without so much as a birthday card, and now he wanted Sophie back. Where is he? Clara, maybe you should call a lawyer first. Where is he? Principal Rodriguez sighed. Conference room B. Clara had imagined this moment countless times over the past 2 years, what she would say to Ethan if she ever saw him again, how she would make him understand the damage he'd done by walking away. In her fantasies, she was composed, dignified, untouchable. In reality, her hands shook as she pushed open the conference room door, and her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Hello, Ethan. He looked exactly the same, sandy brown hair, weak chin, those pale blue eyes that had once seemed sensitive but now just looked calculating. He sat at the conference table in an expensive suit Clara knew he couldn't afford, flanked by a sharp-faced woman in her 50s who radiated predatory competence. Clara. Ethan stood, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You look good. Motherhood agrees with you. The casual tone, as if they were old friends running into each other at a coffee shop, made Clara's temper flare. What do you want, Ethan? I want my daughter. He gestured to the chair across from him. Why don't you sit down? Ms. Hartwell and I would like to discuss Sophie's future. I'm Margaret Hartwell, the lawyer said, her voice crisp and cold. I represent Mr. Torres in this matter. Ms. Chen, your ex-husband has some very serious concerns about his daughter's welfare. Clara remained standing, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Sophie is fine. She's happy, healthy, and loved. Something she never was when you were around. Is she? Ethan's voice carried a note of fake concern that made Clara's skin crawl. Because from what I understand, you're working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over her head. You're facing eviction. And now you're shacking up with strange men and leaving Sophie with babysitters all night. The blood drained from Clara's face. How could he possibly know about Damian? About the eviction notice? I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Ms. Hartwell slid a manila folder across the table. Because we have documentation of your lifestyle choices. Photos of you leaving your apartment building at night in inappropriate clothing. Records of your financial instability. Witness statements about your recent male companion. Clara's hands shook as she opened the folder. The photos were grainy but unmistakable, her leaving for her date with Damian, her returning home with him leaving the next morning. Someone had been watching her, documenting her private moments like evidence in a crime. You had me followed. I had my daughter's welfare investigated, Ethan corrected. Clara, I know you're trying your best, but Sophie deserves better than this. She deserves stability, security, a real family. She has a real family. She has me. A mother who works 3 jobs and can't pay the rent? A mother who brings strange men home and leaves her daughter with friends overnight? Ethan leaned forward, his voice taking on that reasonable tone she remembered from their fights. Clara, be realistic. What kind of life is that for a 6-year-old? It's an honest life. It's a life where she's wanted and loved, not abandoned the moment things get difficult. I made a mistake, Ethan said, and for a moment his mask slipped enough to show something that might have been genuine regret. I was young, scared, overwhelmed. But I've grown up, Clara. I have a good job now, a stable relationship. Jessica and I can give Sophie everything, a big house, private school, a college fund. Everything you can't provide. The name hit Clara like a slap. Jessica? My fiancée. She's wonderful with children, and she's excited about being Sophie's stepmother. Ethan's smile was poison wrapped in silk. We're expecting our own child in a few months, so Sophie would have a little brother or sister. A real family, Clara. Isn't that what you've always wanted for her? Clara stared at the photos in the folder, at the evidence of her supposedly unfit life. Working multiple jobs to support her daughter was being twisted into neglect. Going on one date in 2 years was being painted as promiscuity. Fighting to keep them housed and fed was being used as proof that she couldn't provide. This is insane, she whispered. No judge would take Sophie away from me based on this. Wouldn't they? Miss Hartwell's smile was razor-sharp. Single mother, multiple jobs, facing eviction, bringing strange men around a minor child? Ms. Chen, I've won custody cases with far less evidence. The mysterious boyfriend is particularly concerning, Ethan added. No one seems to know anything about him. No employment history we can find, no local address. For all we know, he could be a criminal, a drug dealer, or worse. Is that really the kind of influence you want around my daughter? Clara's throat closed up. Damian. They were using Damian against her, twisting their one perfect night into something sordid and dangerous. And the worst part was, she couldn't even defend him because she didn't know anything about him either. He'd vanished as completely as if he'd never existed. I want to see those court documents, Clara said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Miss Hartwell slid another folder across the table. Emergency custody petition, filed this morning. We're requesting immediate temporary placement with Mr. Torres pending a full custody hearing. The legal language blurred together as Clara tried to process what she was reading. Emergency custody. Temporary placement. Full hearing. The words felt like weapons aimed at her heart. You can't just take her. I'm her mother. And I'm her father, Ethan said quietly. A father who can provide for her in ways you simply can't. Clara, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to do what's best for Sophie. What's best for Sophie is staying with the parent who didn't abandon her. The parent who's about to be homeless. Miss Hartwell's voice was ice-cold. Miss Chen, let's be realistic. You're one missed paycheck away from living in your car. Is that really the environment you want for a 6-year-old? Clara felt the walls closing in around her. Everything they were saying was technically true, even if they were twisting it into something ugly. She was facing eviction. She did work multiple jobs. She had brought Damian home, and he had disappeared without explanation. I need to call my lawyer, she said. Of course. Ethan's smile was sympathetic and false. Though I should mention, this doesn't have to go to court. We could work something out privately. Clara looked up sharply. What do you mean? Visitation, Ethan said smoothly. Regular, substantial visitation. Maybe Sophie could spend summers with us in Los Angeles. Christmas breaks. We could even provide financial support to help with your situation here. The offer hung in the air like bait on a hook. Clara could see exactly what Ethan was offering, money and stability in exchange for sharing Sophie. Part of her, the part that lay awake at night wondering how she was going to pay the next bill, was tempted. But another part, the part that had held Sophie through every fever and nightmare and triumph for 6 years, recoiled at the thought of letting this man back into their lives. No, Clara said. Sophie stays with me. Miss Hartwell sighed like Clara was being unreasonable. Miss Chen, I strongly advise you to reconsider. This can be handled amicably, or it can be handled in court. But either way, Mr. Torres is going to be part of his daughter's life from now on. We'll be in touch, Ethan said, standing. Clara? For what it's worth, I really am sorry it's come to this. After they left, Clara sat alone in the conference room staring at the legal documents that threatened to tear her world apart. Emergency custody hearing. Temporary placement. Unfit mother. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and dialed the number Damian had programmed in 2 nights ago. The number she'd stared at a dozen times without having the courage to call. The mechanical voice that answered made her heart sink. The number you have dialed is not in service. Clara tried again, certain she'd misdialed. Same message. She scrolled through her recent calls, found the number, and tried once more. The number you have dialed is not in service. The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered onto the conference table. Not in service. Like Damian had never existed. Like the man who'd held her and whispered promises and made her feel precious had been nothing more than a beautiful dream. Clara buried her face in her hands and tried not to break apart completely. Ethan was back with lawyers and money and threats. Her eviction notice was still sitting in her kitchen drawer like a ticking bomb. And the man she'd started to trust, the man she'd let into her heart and her bed, had vanished without a trace. She'd never felt so completely, utterly alone. Through the conference room window, Clara could see Sophie's classroom, could see her daughter's dark head bent over her schoolwork, oblivious to the storm gathering around her. Sophie, who trusted Clara to keep her safe, to keep their little family together, to be strong enough for both of them. Clara wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. She might be alone, but she wasn't powerless. Ethan had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated how far a mother would go to protect her child. He was about to find out exactly what Clara Winters was capable of when someone threatened the most important thing in her world. But first, she had to figure out how to fight a war when she didn't even know who the real enemy was. Chapter 6. The scent hit Damian like a physical blow the moment Victor opened the evidence file. Where did you get this? Damian's voice was deadly quiet as he stared at the photograph of Ethan Hale shaking hands with a man Damian recognized all too well. Seattle. Our contact there managed to get photos of the meeting 3 days ago. Victor pointed to the second man in the image. Lucian Darkmoor. Beta of the Northwest Territory Pack. They've been trying to find leverage against you for months. Damian felt his world tilt on its axis. This wasn't about custody or money or Ethan's sudden paternal instincts. This was pack politics. This was war. They're using Clara to get to me. Looks that way. Ashford's pack has been losing territory and influence ever since you took over the shipping routes. Word is they're getting desperate. Victor flipped to the next photo, Ethan Hale walking out of a high-end law firm with a briefcase full of cash. They found your weakness, Damian. Your mate. The wolf inside Damian went berserk. His enemies had targeted Clara, had put Sophie in danger, had turned what should have been the happiest discovery of his life into a weapon against his pack. The urge to shift, to hunt, to rip Ethan Hale apart with his bare hands was almost overwhelming. How long have they been watching her? Based on the dates on these surveillance photos? Since the night you met her. Victor met Damian's eyes grimly. They've been tracking your movements, Damian. Following your scent trail. Clara walked into that restaurant completely innocent, and walked out with a target on her back. Damian slammed his fist onto the desk hard enough to crack the solid oak. Get Lucas Gray on the phone. Now. Damian. Now, Victor. And get our best family law attorney. Hell, get all of them. Damian was already reaching for his jacket. And prepare a security detail. Where are you going? To protect my mate. 20 minutes later, Damian stood outside Clara's apartment building with his heart hammering against his ribs and Lucas Gray, the most ruthless family attorney on the East Coast, beside him. He'd called in every favor, spent more money than most people made in a year, and still felt like he was walking into battle unarmed. Because the real enemy wasn't Ethan Hale or custody papers or even Lucian Darkmoor's pack. The real enemy was the look he expected to see in Clara's eyes when she realized how thoroughly he'd lied to her. Mr. Blackwood, Lucas said as they climbed the narrow stairs, I should remind you that inserting yourself into this situation could complicate matters. If Miss Chen's ex-husband's attorney discovers your resources, they could argue that your involvement proves their point about inappropriate relationships. Let them try. Damian's voice carried the authority of an alpha who'd never lost a battle. Just make sure Sophie stays with her mother. Clara answered the door on the second knock, and the sight of her nearly brought Damian to his knees. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her face pale with exhaustion, and she looked so fragile that his wolf wanted to wrap her up and never let anything hurt her again. Damian. She said his name like she wasn't sure he was real. What are you doing here? I came to help. Damian gestured to Lucas, who stepped forward with professional courtesy. This is Lucas Gray, one of the best family attorneys in the country. He's here about Sophie. Clara's gaze flicked between them, confusion and wariness warring in her expression. I don't understand. How do you even know about Sophie? About Ethan? May we come in? Lucas asked gently. This conversation would be better held privately. Clara hesitated for a moment that felt like eternity, then stepped aside. Sophie's in her room doing homework. The tiny apartment looked even smaller with Lucas's imposing presence filling it, but Damian barely noticed. All his attention was focused on Clara, on the way she held herself like she was afraid she might shatter, on the defensive set of her shoulders that told him she was preparing for another blow. Ms. Chen, Lucas began, settling his briefcase on the coffee table. I understand you received custody papers today. How could you possibly know that? Clara's voice was sharp with suspicion. And why would you care? Damian had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed what he would say, but faced with Clara's obvious pain and mistrust, the words dried up in his throat. I have connections, he said lamely. When I heard what was happening. Connections. Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Right. And I suppose your mysterious security consulting job comes with a legal team that specializes in family law? Clara. No. She turned on him, eyes blazing. You disappeared. You left me a note like I was some one-night stand you couldn't wait to escape, and now you show up with an attorney? What kind of game are you playing? The accusation hit Damian like a physical blow because she was right. From her perspective, his behavior made no sense. He'd vanished without explanation and reappeared with resources that clearly didn't match his claimed background. It's not a game, Damian said quietly. I had to leave. There was an emergency. Your phone number doesn't work. I had to change it. Security reasons. Security reasons. Clara shook her head. Do you hear yourself? Nothing you say makes sense, Damian. Nothing about you makes sense. Before Damian could respond, Sophie's door opened and the little girl appeared in the hallway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She was smaller than Damian had imagined, with huge dark eyes and Clara's delicate bone structure, but there was something about her that made his wolf sit up and take notice. Mommy? Sophie's voice was small, uncertain. Why are you upset? I'm not upset, baby. Just talking to some friends. Clara forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Why don't you go back to your homework? But Sophie wasn't looking at her mother. She was staring at Damian with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. Slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force, she walked toward him. You smell like the forest, she said matter-of-factly. Clara went very still. Sophie, what did you say? He smells like the forest where the wolves live. Sophie stopped directly in front of Damian, tilting her head like she was listening to something only she could hear. Like pine trees and wild things. Damian felt his world shift again. Children were more sensitive to supernatural presence than adults, but Sophie's reaction was stronger than anything he'd ever encountered. She shouldn't be able to smell his wolf so clearly, shouldn't be drawn to him like this unless. Sophie, go to your room, Clara said sharply. I know you, Sophie said to Damian, ignoring her mother completely. I've been dreaming about you. The word sent ice through Damian's veins. Dreams were how pack bonds formed, how mates recognized each other, how the supernatural world called to those who belonged to it. But Sophie was human. Completely human. Wasn't she? Sophie. Clara's voice carried a note of panic now. Room. Now. Sophie blinked as if waking up, looked around the room in confusion, then scurried back to her bedroom. The door closed with a soft click, leaving behind a silence that thrummed with unasked questions. What just happened? Clara whispered. Damian exchanged a look with Lucas, who was watching the proceedings with the carefully neutral expression of a man who'd learned not to question his client's unusual circumstances. Children have active imaginations, Damian said, but even he could hear how hollow the words sounded. That wasn't imagination. Clara was staring at the spot where Sophie had stood. She's never said anything like that before. And the way she looked at you. Ms. Chen, Lucas interrupted smoothly, perhaps we should focus on the immediate concern. Your ex-husband's custody petition. Clara blinked, seeming to remember why they were there. Right. The petition. She sank onto the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. I can't afford an attorney like you, Mr. Chen. I can barely afford rent. There's no charge, Lucas said. Mr. Blackwood is covering all legal fees. Clara's head snapped up. Absolutely not. Clara, Damian began. No. I don't take charity, and I especially don't take charity from men who lie to me. Clara stood, crossing her arms defensively. I don't know who you really are, Damian, but security consultants don't have lawyers like him on speed dial. Damian felt the trap closing around him. Every answer he gave would lead to more questions he couldn't truthfully answer without revealing the supernatural world. But Clara deserved the truth, deserved to understand why he'd left, why he was back, why her daughter had just recognized his wolf nature without any explanation. You're right, he said finally. I'm not just a security consultant. Then what are you? Damian met her eyes, seeing the hurt and suspicion there, knowing that his next words would either save them or destroy any chance they had at a future together. I'm wealthy, Clara. Very wealthy. The security consulting is just one of my businesses. How wealthy? Wealthy enough that Ethan Hale and his threats don't scare me. Wealthy enough to make sure Sophie stays exactly where she belongs, with you. Clara stared at him for a long moment, and Damian could practically see her mind working, trying to fit this new information into what she knew about him. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to see me, not my bank account. Because I was tired of people looking at me like a meal ticket instead of a man. Damian took a step toward her. Because what we had that night was real, Clara. It was the realest thing I've ever experienced. And yet you still left. I had to. There were complications. Business emergencies that couldn't wait. Damian hated the half-truths, hated the way they tasted like ash in his mouth. But I came back. I'm here now. With an attorney and a solution to all my problems. Clara's voice was bitter. How convenient. Clara, your daughter is in danger of being taken away from you by a man who abandoned her. This isn't about convenience or pride or what you think you can afford. This is about Sophie. The words hit their mark. Clara's defensive posture crumbled slightly, and Damian could see the fear she was trying so hard to hide. Why would you do this? She whispered. Help a woman you barely know? Because you're not just some woman I barely know. Damian moved closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. Because what happened between us wasn't just a one-night stand, no matter how it ended. Because you matter, Clara. You and Sophie both matter. I don't even know your last name. Blackwood. Damian Nightshade. Blackwood. Clara tested the name like she was tasting wine. Should I recognize that name? Damian hesitated. The Blackwood name carried weight in certain circles, appeared on charity boards and corporate donor lists and political contribution records. But to someone like Clara, struggling to pay rent and working 3 jobs, it probably meant nothing. Maybe. I try to keep a low profile. Clara studied his face, and Damian could see her weighing her options. Pride against pragmatism. Independence against Sophie's welfare. Trust against every instinct that told her this was too good to be true. Mr. Chen, she said finally, addressing the attorney without taking her eyes off Damian. What exactly are you proposing? We fight the custody petition. We demonstrate that Sophie's current living situation is stable and in her best interests. We make Mr. Torres prove his allegations instead of letting him rely on innuendo and character assassination. Lucas's voice was calm, professional. And we win. That's simple. With Mr. Blackwood's resources behind us? Yes, it can be that simple. Clara was quiet for so long that Damian began to think she was going to refuse. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you want in return? The question hit Damian like a punch to the gut. Nothing. Nobody does something like this for nothing. Especially not for someone they barely know. Damian could have told her about mate bonds and pack loyalty and the way his wolf had recognized her as the other half of his soul. He could have explained about the rival pack and Ethan's true motivations and the danger she was in just by being connected to him. He could have laid his whole truth at her feet and trusted her to understand. Instead, he gave her the one truth he could safely offer. I care about you, Clara. I care about Sophie. Sometimes that's enough. Clara stared at him for another endless moment, then turned to Lucas. If I agree to this, what happens next? We file a response to the petition. We request an emergency hearing to address the immediate custody threat. We prepare a defense that shows you're a fit and loving mother who's doing everything possible to provide for her daughter. Lucas opened his briefcase. But we need to move quickly. Mr. Torres's attorney isn't going to wait. Clara looked around her tiny apartment, at Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator, at the stack of bills on the counter, at the eviction notice she thought no one knew about. Then she looked at Damian, this mysterious man who'd entered her life like a storm and was now offering to be her shelter. If I do this, she said slowly, I need to know that you're not going to disappear again. Sophie's been through enough abandonment. I'm not going anywhere, Damian promised. And I need to know that this isn't some kind of, I don't know, some rich man's fantasy about rescuing the poor single mother. Because I'm not a charity case, Damian. I'm a woman with a daughter to protect. I know exactly what you are, Damian said softly. The question is whether you'll let me help you prove it. Clara closed her eyes, and Damian could see her making the hardest decision of her life, choosing to trust the man who'd already hurt her because the alternative might mean losing Sophie forever. When she opened her eyes, there was steel in them. Okay. Let's fight. Chapter 7. The manila envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in Clara's hands. She stared at it across her kitchen table, where it sat next to Sophie's cereal bowl and homework folder like a bomb waiting to explode her carefully reconstructed world. 3 days since she'd hired Leo Stone, Lila's ex-boyfriend who'd become a private investigator after their breakup. 3 days of wondering if she was making a mistake, if she was being paranoid, if she was destroying something precious because she was too scared to trust. 3 days of Damian showing up every evening with takeout and homework help and gentle kisses that made her forget why she'd ever doubted him. Now the envelope was here, and Clara wasn't sure she wanted to know what was inside. Just open it, she whispered to herself. Whatever it is, you need to know. The first page made her blood run cold. Blackwood, Damian Victor. Dilby, October 15, 1989. Net worth, estimated $2.3 billion. CEO/founder, Blackwood Industries. Clara's hands shook as she flipped through page after page of documentation. Forbes profiles. Business Journal articles. Charity gala photos where Damian stood next to governors and senators and celebrities, looking every inch the billionaire he apparently was. Not wealthy. Not just successful. Billionaire. As in, more money than some small countries. The photos were what destroyed her. Damian in a tuxedo at some elegant fundraiser, a stunning blonde draped on his arm. Damian shaking hands with the mayor at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Damian accepting an award for Philanthropist of the Year, while a room full of society elite applauded. This was his world. This was who he really was, not the down-to-earth man who'd sat on her second-hand couch and listened to her talk about her dreams, but a billionaire who moved in circles so far above her they might as well be on different planets. Clara felt sick. She'd known he was lying about being just a security consultant, but this? This was beyond anything she'd imagined. While she'd been worrying about affording Sophie's school supplies, Damian had been deciding how to spend money that she couldn't even conceptualize. Her phone buzzed with a text, picking up dinner. Chinese or Italian? Clara stared at the message, at the casual tone that suggested he was just Damian, just the man who'd become part of their evening routine over the past 3 days. Not Damian Nightshade, CEO. Not Damian Nightshade, billionaire. Not Damian Nightshade, who lived in a world where her entire year's salary was probably what he spent on lunch. She typed back, "We need to talk. Can you come over?" "On my way." "Everything okay?" Clara almost laughed. "Everything okay?" She'd been sleeping with a man whose net worth could solve every financial problem she'd ever had without him even noticing, and he'd been pretending to be a middle-class security consultant. Nothing would ever be okay again. 20 minutes later, Damian knocked on her door carrying bags of Chinese food and wearing that smile that had become dangerously familiar over the past few days. He looked so normal, so much like the man she'd been falling for, that for a moment Clara wavered. Then she remembered the photos of him with senators and supermodels, and her resolve hardened. "Where's Sophie?" Damian asked, setting the food on her counter. "Sleepover at Lila's." Clara gestured toward the kitchen table where the investigator's report lay spread out like evidence at a crime scene. "We need to talk." Damian froze when he saw the papers. Even from across the room, Clara could see the color drain from his face. "Clara." "Damian Nightshade." She said his full name like an accusation. CEO and founder of Blackwood Industries. Net worth estimated at $2.3 billion. Philanthropist of the Year. Regular attendee at political fundraisers and charity galas. She picked up one of the photos. "This is you shaking hands with Senator Williams at some $5,000 plate dinner. Last month." Damian didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there looking like a man facing execution. "Security consultant," Clara continued, her voice getting sharper. "That's what you told me, right? Just a regular guy who does risk assessment for corporations. Nothing too exciting." "Clara, let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you've been lying to me from the moment we met. How you've been playing some kind of twisted game, pretending to be normal while you're actually one of the richest men in the country." Clara threw the photo down so hard it scattered across the table. "Explain how you sat on my couch and listened to me worry about rent when you could buy my entire building without thinking about it. It wasn't a game." Damian stepped toward her, his hands raised like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Clara, please, just listen." "No, you listen." Clara backed away, putting the table between them. "I trusted you. I let you into my home, my life, my daughter's life. I let you convince me to accept help from your lawyer, to let you fight my battles, and the whole time you were lying about who you are." "I never lied about who I am," Damian said quietly. "I lied about what I have. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been laughing at the poor single mother who was so grateful for scraps from your table." The words hit Damian like a physical blow. "That's not, God, Clara, that's not how I see you at all." "Then how do you see me? What am I to you, Damian? Some kind of charity case? A way to feel good about yourself by helping the less fortunate? You're my..." Damian stopped himself, and Clara saw something flicker in his eyes, something wild and desperate. "You're everything to me." "Everything?" Clara laughed bitterly. "I'm a woman who works 3 jobs to afford a 1-bedroom apartment in a building you could probably buy with your pocket change. We live in completely different worlds. Money doesn't matter. Money always matters." Clara slammed her hand down on the table. "It matters when you're choosing between groceries and medicine. It matters when you're facing eviction. It matters when your daughter asks why she can't have the toys other kids have. Don't you dare tell me money doesn't matter when you've never had to live without it. You think I've never struggled?" Damian's voice was getting harder, edges of something dangerous creeping in. "You think I was born into this? I don't know what to think about you anymore. I don't know what's true and what's another lie. I built Blackwood Industries from nothing, Damian said, and Clara could hear barely controlled fury in his voice. I grew up in foster care, Clara. Bounced from home to home until I aged out at 18 with nothing but the clothes on my back. Everything I have, I earned. The revelation should have softened her anger, but it only made it worse. Then you should understand what it's like to struggle. You should understand why lying about this is such a betrayal. I was protecting you. From what? From knowing you could actually help instead of just pretending to? From my world. Damian was pacing now, agitation rolling off him in waves. From the people who would use you to get to me, who would see you as a weakness to exploit. From the paparazzi and the gold diggers and the politicians who would see Sophie as leverage. So you decided to lie instead. You decided I couldn't handle the truth. I decided I wanted to be just Damian with you. Not Damian Nightshade the billionaire, not Damian Nightshade the CEO. Just Damian. The man who thinks you're the most incredible woman he's ever met. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. But that man doesn't exist, does he? There is no, just Damian. There's only Damian Nightshade, and Damian Nightshade lives in a world I'll never belong to. That's not true. Isn't it? Clara gestured around her tiny apartment. This is my world, Damian. This is my life. And your life involves charity galas and private jets and senators. We don't fit. We fit perfectly. Damian stopped pacing and turned to face her, and something in his expression made Clara take a step back. That night we spent together, the way you feel in my arms, the way Sophie looks at me like I'm someone worth knowing, that's not about money or status or any of the bullshit that doesn't matter. That's real. But everything else was a lie. Not everything. Damian moved closer, and Clara could swear she saw something flickering in his eyes, something that made her primitive brain scream danger. My feelings for you are real. My need to protect you and Sophie is real. The fact that I would do anything to keep you safe is real. Protect me from what? Clara demanded. What are you so afraid of that you had to create this elaborate fiction? You wouldn't understand. Try me. Damian went very still, and for a moment Clara thought he was going to tell her. Then his expression shuddered, and she knew he was going to lie again. There are people in my world who would hurt you to hurt me. Business rivals, competitors, people who see kindness as weakness and love as leverage. Business rivals. Clara shook her head. You're talking about business rivals like they're assassins. Some of them might as well be. The deadly seriousness in his tone made Clara's skin crawl. What kind of business was Damian in that he talked about rivals like enemies? What kind of world had she stumbled into? I want you to leave, she said quietly. Clara. I want you to leave, and I want you to take your lawyer and your money and your protection with you. Sophie and I were fine before you came along, and we'll be fine after you're gone. No. The word came out harder than Damian probably intended. I'm not leaving you to face Ethan alone. That's not your choice to make. Like hell it isn't. Damian stepped closer, and Clara saw something shift in his features, something that made her heart race with an instinct older than civilization. I'm not letting anyone hurt you or Sophie. Not Ethan, not his lawyers, not anyone. You don't get to decide that. You don't get to control my life just because you have money. This isn't about money. Damian's voice was rising, taking on a rough quality that made the hair on Clara's arm stand up. This is about protecting what's mine. I'm not yours. Clara shouted back. I'm not some possession you can claim and protect and lie to for my own good. Yes, you are. Damian's eyes were blazing now, and Clara could swear they were reflecting light like an animal's. You've been mine since the moment I saw you. You'll always be mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have made her angry. Instead, it sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way Damian was looking at her, like a predator that had just decided to stop pretending to be tame. Get out, Clara whispered. No. Damian was breathing hard now, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I'm not leaving you. I can't leave you. Get out. I said no. Damian's voice cracked like a whip through the apartment, and something impossible happened. For just a moment, less than a heartbeat, his features shifted. His eyes flashed gold, his teeth lengthened into something sharp and wild, and Clara could swear she saw his fingernails extend into claws. Then he was just Damian again, staring at her with horror and something that looked like despair. Clara pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. What? How did you? What are you? Damian took a step toward her, and Clara flinched. Clara, I can explain. Stay away from me. Her voice was shaking, barely audible. Just stay away. Please, let me. What are you? Clara whispered again. What are you really? Damian looked at her with the expression of a man who'd just lost everything. Someone who loves you. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. Clara stared at him, this man she'd thought she was falling in love with, this stranger who'd just done something that defied every law of nature she knew. Her mind was reeling, trying to process what she'd seen, trying to convince herself it had been a trick of the light or stress or exhaustion. But she knew what she'd seen. She knew it was impossible, but she knew it was real. I'm going crazy, she said softly. I'm having a breakdown. That's the only explanation. You're not crazy. Damian's voice was gentle now, carefully controlled. You're not having a breakdown. You saw exactly what you think you saw. That's impossible. A lot of things are impossible. That doesn't make them less real. Clara slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her knees drawn up to her chest. This isn't happening. People don't just change. Not like that. Clara. Don't. She held up a shaking hand. Don't come near me. Don't touch me. Just don't. Damian stood frozen in the middle of her kitchen, looking like he wanted to go to her but knowing that any movement might shatter what was left of her composure. I need you to leave, Clara said without looking at him. I need time to think. I need to figure out if I'm losing my mind or if the world just stopped making sense. I can't leave you like this. You can and you will. Clara finally looked up at him, and Damian flinched at the fear in her eyes. Because if you don't, I'm going to call the police and tell them that the man who's been helping with my custody case just... I don't even know what to call what you just did. Damian was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Okay. I'll go. But Clara? This conversation isn't over. There are things you need to know, things that affect Sophie's safety. I'll give you tonight to process this, but tomorrow we're going to talk. Really talk. About what? About why Ethan really came back. About who sent him. About why Sophie reacted to me the way she did. Damian moved toward the door, then paused. And about what I am, and what that means for all of us. After he left, Clara sat on her kitchen floor staring at the investigators' reports scattered across her table. Damian Nightshade, billionaire. Damian Nightshade, CEO. Damian Nightshade, who apparently could do things that shouldn't be possible. Clara buried her face in her hands and wondered if insanity was hereditary, because clearly she was losing her mind. Either that, or the man she was falling in love with wasn't entirely human. And Clara wasn't sure which possibility terrified her more. Chapter 8. Clara was still sitting on her kitchen floor when the impossible happened again. She'd been staring at the wall for 3 hours, trying to convince herself that stress and exhaustion had made her hallucinate Damian's transformation. People didn't just shift into something else. It was impossible. It was insane. It was. The sound that came from outside her window made every hair on her body stand up. It was a howl. Deep, mournful, and so close it seemed to vibrate through the walls of her apartment. Clara scrambled to her feet and peered through the blinds, expecting to see a stray dog in the alley below. Instead, she saw Damian. He stood in the narrow space between her building and the next, his head tilted back toward her window, and even 3 stories up Clara could see the golden glow of his eyes in the darkness. As she watched, frozen with terror and fascination, he howled again, a sound of pure anguish that made her chest ache. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows like he'd never been there at all. Clara sank onto her couch and buried her face in her hands. She wasn't hallucinating. Whatever Damian was, whatever she'd witnessed, it was real. And that terrified her more than any custody battle or financial crisis ever could. Her phone rang at exactly midnight, Damian's name flashing on the screen. "I told you I needed time," Clara said without preamble. "Sophie's in danger." The words hit Clara like ice water. "What do you mean?" "Pack up whatever you need. I'm coming to get you. We have to go somewhere safe." "Damian, you're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared." His voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "Ethan isn't working alone, Clara. The people who hired him just escalated things, and Sophie is their target." Clara was already moving towards Sophie's room before remembering her daughter wasn't there. "She's at Lila's. She's safe. Call Lila. Now. Make sure Sophie is still there." The urgency in Damian's tone made Clara's hands shake as she dialed Lila's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. "She's not answering," Clara whispered. "Try again." Clara called 3 more times with the same result. Panic clawed at her throat. Something's wrong. Lila always answers her phone. "I'm on my way. Don't open the door for anyone but me." The line went dead, leaving Clara alone with her terror and 1,000 questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. She tried Lila's number again, then Sophie's tablet, then Lila's home phone. Nothing. When Damian knocked 10 minutes later, Clara yanked the door open before he could say anything. "Where is she?" Clara demanded. "Where's my daughter?" Damian stepped inside, and Clara saw he had company, a tall man with steel-gray hair and eyes like winter. "This is Victor, my second-in-command," Damian said. "Victor, tell her." Victor's expression was grim. "We have surveillance footage from Lila's building." 3 men entered at 11:30 p.m. They left 20 minutes later with Lila and Sophie. Clara's legs gave out. Damian caught her before she hit the floor, his arms strong and warm around her. "They have Sophie," she whispered. "Oh God, they have my baby." "We're going to get her back," Damian said fiercely. "I promise you, Clara. We will get her back." "Who are they? What do they want?" Damian exchanged a look with Victor, and Clara saw resignation in his features. "Sit down," Damian said gently. "Because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible." Clara let him guide her to the couch, her mind reeling. "More impossible than what I saw earlier?" "Much more impossible." Damian sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "Clara, there's a world that exists alongside yours. A world of creatures you've been taught don't exist. Werewolves, for one. Werewolves." Clara said the word like she was testing its weight. "You're telling me werewolves are real?" "I'm telling you that I'm real. That what you saw earlier was me losing control of my wolf." Damian's grip on her hands tightened. "I'm the alpha king of the largest pack on the East Coast. I command over 300 wolves." Clara stared at him. A week ago, the most supernatural thing in her life had been Sophie's imaginary friend. Now the man she was falling in love with was claiming to be the king of werewolves. "Prove it," she said quietly. "Clara. If you want me to believe this, prove it. Show me." Damian was very still for a moment. Then he stood and stepped back, giving himself space. Clara watched as he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The change was gradual this time, controlled. His features sharpened, becoming more angular. His eyes flashed gold and stayed that way. His hands extended into claws, and when he smiled, Clara saw fangs. But he was still recognizably Damian. Still the man who'd held her and made her feel precious. "This is what I am," he said, and his voice carried a rough quality that raised goosebumps on Clara's arms. Not completely human, but not completely wolf either. Something in between. Clara found her voice. "Change back." Damian closed his eyes again, and slowly his features returned to normal. When he opened his eyes, they were the dark brown she'd fallen in love with. "The people who hired Ethan are from a rival pack," Damian continued, sitting back down. "They've been looking for leverage against me, ways to force me to give up territory or step down from leadership. When they discovered you, discovered what you mean to me, they found their weapon." "What I mean to you," Clara repeated numbly. "You're my mate, Clara. In wolf culture, that means you're the other half of my soul. It means I would die to protect you, and I would kill anyone who tried to hurt you." Mate. The word felt strange on Clara's tongue. Like, married? Deeper than married. Wolves mate for life. There's only one person in the world meant for each of us, and when we find them. Damian touched her face gently. "I knew the moment I saw you. My wolf recognized you instantly." Clara thought about the instant attraction she'd felt, the way being with Damian had felt like coming home. Is that why it felt so intense between us? Partly. But the feelings are real, Clara. The connection we have isn't just supernatural, it's genuine. And Sophie? Clara's voice cracked. What does this have to do with Sophie? Damian and Victor exchanged another look, and Clara's heart sank. Sophie reacted to my wolf nature in ways that shouldn't be possible for a human child, Damian said carefully. The way she could smell my wolf, the way she was drawn to me, the dreams she mentioned, those are signs of supernatural heritage. That's impossible. I'm completely human. Sophie's father is completely human. Are you sure? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Clara thought about her family, about parents who'd always been distant and secretive, about grandmother's stories that had seemed like folklore but now. My grandmother used to tell stories, Clara said slowly. About our family, about why we moved around so much when my mother was young. She said we were protectors once, guardians of something important. Victor leaned forward. What kind of protectors? I thought they were just stories. Tales about ancestors who hunted monsters, who kept people safe from things that went bump in the night. Clara laughed shakily. She called them wolf hunters. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara, Damian said very carefully, what was your grandmother's maiden name? Chen. That's where I got my last name when I divorced Ethan. I went back to my family name. Chen, Victor whispered. Jesus Christ, Damian. She's Chen Line. What does that mean? Clara demanded. Damian ran his hands through his hair. The Chen family were legendary wolf hunters 3 generations ago. But they weren't our enemies, they were our protectors. They hunted the wolves who went rogue, who threatened to expose our world or hurt innocent people. My family hunted werewolves. Your family saved werewolves, Damian corrected. They kept the balance, maintained the secret, protected both our worlds. But the bloodline was thought to be extinct. Apparently not, Victor said grimly. Clara felt like the world was spinning out of control. So Sophie. Sophie might be what, exactly? A bridge, Damian said. Someone who carries both hunter and wolf genetics. Someone incredibly rare and incredibly powerful. Powerful enough that rival packs would kill for her? Powerful enough that they'd use her to control me, Damian said quietly. If they have Sophie, they can force me to do anything they want. Clara stood abruptly, pacing to the window. This is insane. This whole thing is insane. 2 weeks ago I was a single mother working 3 jobs, and now you're telling me I'm descended from werewolf hunters and my daughter is some kind of supernatural bridge? I know it's a lot. A lot? Clara spun around. Damian, you're talking about fairy tales. About monsters and magic and bloodlines. You're talking about a world that doesn't exist. A world that kidnapped your daughter, Victor said quietly. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. However insane this all sounded, however impossible it seemed, Sophie was gone. Her little girl was in the hands of people, creatures, who saw her as a weapon. What do they want? Clara asked. For me to abdicate, Damian said. To give up my position as Alpha King and turn over control of the territory to them. So do it. Clara turned to face him. Give them whatever they want. Just get Sophie back. It's not that simple, Victor said. If Damian steps down, it creates a power vacuum. Other packs will move in, territory wars will start. Hundreds of innocent people, wolves and humans, will die in the chaos. I don't care about hundreds of people, Clara said fiercely. I care about my daughter. I know, Damian said, standing and moving toward her. And we're going to get her back. But we're going to do it the right way. What's the right way? We're going to rescue her. And then we're going to make sure the people who took her never threaten anyone again. Clara saw something dangerous flash in Damian's eyes, something that reminded her he wasn't just a man who could shift into a wolf, he was a king who commanded hundreds of them. How long do we have? They'll contact us with demands within 24 hours, Victor said. Standard protocol for this kind of operation. 24 hours. Clara felt like she might throw up. Sophie's going to be terrified. She doesn't understand what's happening. She's stronger than you think, Damian said gently. And she's not completely helpless. If she really does carry Chen bloodline genetics, she'll have instincts that will help keep her safe. What kind of instincts? The ability to sense supernatural threats. Enhanced reflexes. Maybe even the ability to communicate with wolves. Damian touched Clara's arm. The Chen line were never just hunters, Clara. They were partners. They worked with wolves, communicated with them. Sophie might be able to call for help in ways her captors don't expect. Clara closed her eyes, trying to process everything. Her daughter, her sweet, innocent Sophie, was apparently descended from a line of supernatural hunters and might be able to talk to werewolves. The man she was falling in love with was the king of a secret society of shapeshifters. And somewhere in the city, her little girl was being held by people who wanted to use her as leverage in a war Clara didn't understand. I need to ask you something, Damian said quietly. And I need you to be completely honest. Clara opened her eyes. What? Are you willing to enter my world to save Sophie? Are you willing to accept that everything you thought you knew about reality was wrong? Clara thought about Sophie's drawings of wolves, about her daughter's uncanny ability to sense when Clara was upset, about the way Sophie had looked at Damian like she'd been waiting for him her whole life. I'd walk through hell to save my daughter, Clara said. I don't care if your world is real or if I'm having the most elaborate nervous breakdown in history. Whatever it takes to get Sophie back, I'll do it. Damian nodded grimly. Then we need to start training you. Training me for what? To be what you were born to be, Damian said. A Chen line protector. Because Clara, if we're going to rescue Sophie from a pack of rogue werewolves, you're going to need to remember how to hunt. Chapter 9. The silver knife felt like it belonged in Clara's hand. 3 days of intensive training had awakened something in her blood that she'd never known existed. Victor had been right, the Chen line instincts ran deep, surfacing the moment Clara stopped fighting them and started embracing what she was born to be. Remember, Damian said as their convoy of black SUVs approached the abandoned warehouse where Sophie was being held, Lucian Darkmoor is dangerous. He's been alpha of the Northwest Pack for 20 years, and he didn't get there by being merciful. Clara checked her weapons one final time. The silver knife that had belonged to her great-grandmother, recovered from a safety deposit box Clara hadn't known existed, and a modified crossbow that Victor had taught her to use with deadly accuracy. I don't care if he's been alpha for 100 years, Clara said grimly. He took my daughter. Through the earpiece they'd given her, Clara could hear the other teams checking in. Damian had brought 40 wolves for this rescue mission, more firepower than should have been necessary for one little girl. But Sophie wasn't just any little girl. She was the bridge between two worlds, and Lucian Darkmoor had proven he'd kill to possess that power. Clara. Damian caught her hand as they prepared to exit the vehicle. Whatever happens in there, whatever you see, remember that Sophie needs you alive. Don't take unnecessary risks. The only unnecessary risk would be leaving without her. Damian nodded grimly. He was in full alpha mode now, controlled, lethal, every inch the king he'd been born to be. But Clara could see the worry in his eyes, the way his hands clenched when he thought about Sophie in enemy hands. The warehouse district was eerily quiet as they approached the target building. Too quiet. Clara's newly awakened hunter instincts were screaming that something was wrong. "It's a trap," she whispered into her mic. "I know," Damian replied. "But it's a trap we have to walk into." They moved in coordinated silence, teams spreading out to cover all exits. Clara stayed close to Damian, her heart hammering as they approached the main entrance. Somewhere inside this building was her daughter, and Clara would tear the place apart with her bare hands if necessary to get Sophie back. The first gunshot shattered the night silence. "Contact, east side," someone reported through the comm, multiple hostiles. Then all hell broke loose. Clara had trained for combat, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of a supernatural battle. Wolves shifted mid-fight, becoming blurs of fur and fang that moved too fast for human eyes to track. The sounds were unlike anything she'd ever heard, growls and howls and the wet sounds of violence that made her stomach clench. "Sophie!" Clara called as they fought their way deeper into the warehouse. "Sophie, where are you?" A small voice answered from somewhere in the maze of shipping containers. "Mommy? Mommy, I'm here." Clara's heart leaped. Sophie was alive, and she sounded strong. "We're coming, baby. Stay where you are." Damian and Clara fought side by side, moving towards Sophie's voice with grim determination. Clara's chin-line instincts guided her movements, made her faster and more lethal than she'd ever imagined possible. When a rogue wolf lunged at her, she moved without thinking, her silver knife finding its target with deadly precision. They found Sophie in a makeshift cage in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by 3 wolves in human form who were clearly her guards. But Clara's daughter wasn't cowering in terror as Clara had expected. Sophie was glowing. Not literally, but there was something about her that seemed to shimmer in the dim light, something that made the air around her hum with power. Her eyes were bright gold, wolf eyes, and when she saw Clara, she smiled. "I knew you'd come," Sophie said calmly. "The wolves told me you would." "What wolves, baby?" Sophie pointed to the shadows around her cage, and Clara suddenly realized they weren't empty. Dozens of spectral wolves surrounded Sophie, translucent and shimmering, their eyes fixed protectively on the little girl. "The ancestor wolves," Sophie explained matter-of-factly. "They've been keeping me safe." Damian stared in wonder. "She's manifested the Chen-line gift. She can call the pack spirits." "We can discuss family magic later," Clara said, raising her crossbow as the guards realized they'd been found. "Right now, we're getting out of here." The fight was brutal but brief. Clara's training kicked in, her movements precise and deadly, while Damian fought with the controlled fury of an alpha protecting his family. Within minutes, all 3 guards were down. Clara was working on the lock of Sophie's cage when a slow clap echoed through the warehouse. "Impressive," a voice said from the shadows. "I can see why Damian is so taken with you." Lucian Darkmoor stepped into the light, and Clara immediately understood why this man commanded fear. He was tall and lean with silver hair and eyes like winter ice, but it was the aura of barely contained violence that made her skin crawl. Behind him, looking pale and terrified, was Ethan. "Hello, Clara," her ex-husband said, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." "You never meant for what to go this far?" Clara demanded. "Kidnapping our daughter? Terrorizing a 6-year-old? The original plan was just custody," Ethan said miserably. "They were going to pay me to take Sophie, to get her away from Damian." I needed the money, Clara. Jessica's pregnant, and I'm drowning in debt, and they offered me enough to start over. But then you had to complicate things, Lucian said, his cold gaze fixed on Damian. You had to fall in love with her. You had to claim her as your mate. Suddenly, the little girl became much more valuable. Let them go, Lucian, Damian said, his voice carrying the full weight of his alpha authority. Your fight is with me. Oh, but they are my fight with you. Lucian smiled, and it was the most chilling expression Clara had ever seen. Did you really think I'd settle for just territory? For just shipping routes? Damian, I want your crown. And now I have the perfect leverage to take it. The girl is under my protection, Damian growled. The girl is the key to everything. Lucian moved closer to Sophie's cage, and Clara saw her daughter's spectral wolves bristle in response. A chin-line descendant with awakened abilities? Do you have any idea how rare that is? How powerful she could become? She's 6 years old, Clara snarled. She's a weapon, Lucian corrected. One that will ensure my pack's dominance for generations to come. Clara felt her hunter instincts surge, every cell in her body screaming to protect her child. You'll have to go through me first. That can be arranged. Lucian moved faster than any human should have been able to move, but Clara was ready for him. The chin line hadn't survived for generations by being caught off guard. She rolled aside as Lucian's claws slashed through the air where she'd been standing, coming up with her silver knife ready. The battle that followed was unlike anything Clara could have imagined. Lucian was stronger and faster, but Clara had the advantage of desperation and newly awakened instincts that made her movements unpredictable. Around them, Damian fought off Lucian's remaining wolves, his roars of fury echoing through the warehouse. You fight well for someone who just discovered what she is, Lucian said as they circled each other. I fight well for a mother protecting her child, Clara corrected. She saw the opening when Lucian's attention flicked toward Damian for a split second. Clara's knife found its target, silver sliding between ribs to pierce Lucian's heart. He looked down at the blade in surprise, then back at Clara with something that might have been respect. Well played, little hunter, he whispered, before collapsing. In the sudden silence that followed, Clara heard Ethan whimpering in the corner where he'd been hiding during the fight. Clara, please, he begged. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I just needed the money. Lucian's eyes snapped open, rage blazing in them as he realized he was dying. With his last breath, he lashed out, not at Clara or Damian, but at Ethan. If I can't have the girl, Lucian snarled, then you won't live to enjoy your payment. Ethan's scream cut off abruptly as Lucian's claws tore out his throat. Clara stared in shock as her ex-husband collapsed, blood pooling around his body. Sophie was now truly hers alone, no custody battles, no threats, no one who could legally challenge her right to raise her daughter. Mommy? Sophie's small voice brought Clara back to the present. Can we go home now? Clara looked around the warehouse, at Lucian's body, at Ethan's, at the wolves who were looking at her with something that might have been awe. She'd walked into this building as a struggling single mother. She was walking out as someone who'd killed to protect her child, someone who'd proven herself to Damian's pack in the most definitive way possible. Yes, baby, Clara said, finally getting the cage open and pulling Sophie into her arms. We can go home. But as they left the warehouse, Clara wondered where home was now. Her old life was gone, shattered the moment she'd learned the truth about Damian and the supernatural world. The question was whether she was ready to embrace a new one. Chapter 10. 3 months later, Clara stood in the garden behind Damian's estate, watching Sophie play with a pack of wolf pups who shifted between human and animal form with the casual ease of children everywhere. She's adapting well, Victor observed, joining Clara on the terrace. Better than I am, some days, Clara admitted. Sophie had taken to pack life like she'd been born to it, which Clara supposed she had. Her daughter could now communicate with wolves in both forms, could sense supernatural threats from miles away, and had developed an uncanny ability to mediate disputes between pack members. The pack adores her, Victor continued. And they adore you. Clara smiled. It was true, The wolves who'd initially been suspicious of their alpha's human mate had completely embraced her after the warehouse battle. Clara Winters, who'd killed an enemy alpha to protect her daughter, was now spoken of in the same reverent tones as the legendary chin-line hunters of old. Clara. She turned to find Damian approaching, and her heart still skipped a beat at the sight of him. 3 months of living in his world hadn't diminished the attraction between them. If anything, it had deepened into something that felt like the other half of her soul. "We need to talk," Damian said, and something in his tone made Clara's pulse quicken. He led her to the small pavilion where they'd had their first real conversation about the supernatural world, where Clara had made the decision to embrace what she was born to be. "I have something to ask you," Damian said, dropping to one knee and pulling out a ring box. Clara's breath caught. The ring was stunning, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the afternoon light like captured stars. "Clara Winters," Damian said, his voice rough with emotion, "will you be my mate? Will you be the Luna Queen of this pack? Will you let me love you and Sophie for the rest of our lives?" Clara stared down at him, this man who'd turned her world upside down and then helped her rebuild it into something beautiful. The Alpha King of the East Coast werewolves, kneeling in his garden and asking a former single mother to marry him. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course yes." Damian slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, and Clara felt like her heart might burst with happiness. When they broke apart, she saw Sophie watching from across the garden with a huge grin on her face. "Did you know?" Clara called to her daughter. "The wolves told me," Sophie said solemnly. "They said Damian was going to ask you to be pack mother." "And what did you tell them?" Sophie's grin widened. "I told them you'd say yes because you love him, and because we belong here." Clara looked around the estate that had become their home, at the pack members who'd become their family, at Damian who'd become her everything. Sophie was right, they belonged here. The mating ceremony was held a month later, with the entire pack in attendance. Clara wore a dress that had belonged to Damian's grandmother, the former Luna Queen, and felt the weight of tradition and acceptance as the pack held their approval. "By the laws of our people and the bonds of our hearts," the pack elder intoned, "I pronounce you mates for life. Luna Clara, will you accept the responsibility of protecting this pack?" "I will," Clara said, meaning every word. "Alpha Damian, will you accept Luna Clara as your equal in all things?" "I will," Damian replied, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. When they kissed to seal the bond, Clara felt something click into place in her soul, as if a piece of herself she'd never known was missing had finally been found. The celebration lasted until dawn, with pack members sharing stories of their new Luna's courage, her fierce protection of Sophie, her willingness to embrace a world she'd never known existed. Clara had never felt so welcomed, so cherished, so completely at home. It was Victor who noticed first. "You're pregnant," he said matter-of-factly 3 weeks after the mating ceremony, finding Clara in the kitchen making breakfast. Clara's hand flew to her stomach. "What? How could you possibly?" "Enhanced senses," Victor said with a grin. "Werewolf perk. Congratulations, Luna." Clara sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Damian's child, with the future heir to the pack. "Clara?" Damian appeared in the doorway, already in full protective mode. "What's wrong?" "Victor, why does she look like that?" "Tell him," Victor said, still grinning as he left them alone. Clara looked up at Damian, this man who'd given her everything she'd never dared to dream of: love, family, purpose, a place where she belonged. "We're having a baby," she said softly. Damian went very still. "A baby?" "The heir Victor has been pestering you about providing," Clara said with a shaky laugh. Damian was across the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees beside her chair and placing his hands gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby," he said wonderingly. "A prince or princess. Are you happy?" Clara asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy?" Damian looked up at her with eyes full of wonder and love. "Clara, I've gone from a lonely alpha with no family to a man with a mate, a daughter, and a baby on the way. I've never been happier in my entire life." That evening, they told Sophie, who reacted with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who'd learned to take miracles in stride. Will the baby be able to talk to wolves too? Sophie asked. Probably, Damian said. If they inherit your mother's chin line abilities and my wolf genetics, they'll be very special indeed. Good, Sophie said solemnly. Then they can help me take care of the pack. Clara watched her daughter, so wise for her 6 years, so completely comfortable in this supernatural world, and marveled at how much their lives had changed. A year ago, Clara had been a struggling single mother facing eviction and custody battles. Now she was Luna, queen of the largest werewolf pack on the East Coast, pregnant with an alpha heir, and more deeply in love than she'd ever imagined possible. No regrets? Damian asked later that night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively on her stomach. Clara thought about her old life, the 3 jobs, the constant worry, the bone-deep exhaustion of trying to do everything alone. Then she thought about this life, surrounded by family, protected and cherished, with a daughter who was thriving and a future full of possibilities. No regrets, she said firmly. This is where we belong. Outside their window, the pack was settling in for the night, the sounds of their supernatural family creating a lullaby of belonging. Clara closed her eyes and smiled, knowing that sometimes the greatest strength really did come from accepting help and love, and that the best families were the ones you chose. She'd started this journey as Clara Winters, struggling single mother. She was ending it as Luna Clara Blackwood, mate to an alpha king and mother to a bridge between worlds. And for the first time in her life, Clara knew with absolute certainty that her story was just beginning. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe, like and share for more exciting stories, and do not forget to leave a comment of your opinion on this story.